It was a crisp autumn afternoon, and the leaves outside the classroom window were just beginning to change, painting the playground in hues of gold and red. Melanie stood by the window, watching her young students run and laugh, caught in the innocent joy only children can possess. But as her eyes settled on the twin boys, Liam and Noah Bennett, something didn't sit right. Unlike the others, they weren't playing. They sat together, huddled beneath the slide, whispering to one another in a world of their own. This wasn't the usual quiet behavior Melanie had noticed in the past. It was something deeper, something unsettling. Liam and Noah were 5 years old, their faces framed by tousled blonde hair and hazel eyes that always seemed too serious for their age. As a teacher with years of experience, Melanie had learned to trust her instincts, and something about the twins' behavior seemed off. They had been through a lot in the last few months, losing their mother to cancer, adjusting to life with their father alone. Yet, Melanie couldn't shake the feeling that something more was going on. That feeling intensified during lunchtime. The twins, sitting side by side with matching lunchboxes, were doing something strange. They were secretly dividing their sandwiches and fruit slices, carefully wrapping parts of their lunch in napkins and tucking them away. At first, it seemed like innocent childhood play, but when Melanie asked them about it, the truth was far darker than she could have imagined. They were hiding food for a secret friend. But that friend wasn't imaginary. Melanie's suspicions only grew stronger as the days passed. There were other signs. The twins showing up in the same clothes for days, falling asleep during story time, and the fatigue etched on their faces. It wasn't just grief from losing their mother. No, there was something else. One afternoon, after the last bell rang, Melanie made a decision. She followed the boys. What she uncovered that evening would change everything. It was a secret so hidden, so dark, that it had been carefully concealed from the outside world. A secret that could have cost a young boy his life. And Melanie, with the sharp instincts of a caring teacher, became the one person who could save him. You're watching Acts of Kindness Stories, where we share true tales of human kindness and courage, and the unshakable spirit of those who make a difference when it matters most. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell to hear more inspiring stories. Days passed, and the sense of unease in Melanie only grew. Her concerns for Liam and Noah Bennett had begun as subtle, fleeting thoughts, but now they weighed on her like an anchor pulling her into unknown depths. The twins' actions were starting to paint a clearer picture, one she wasn't ready to face but couldn't ignore. Every detail, every small change in their behavior seemed to hold a clue. The way they huddled together during recess, the tiredness that clung to their small frames, the way they avoided eye contact with their peers. All these things were more than just the result of grief. Something else was happening in their lives, something Melanie needed to understand. One morning, as the kindergarten class sat down for lunch, Melanie noticed Liam and Noah again. This time, their behavior stood out in a way that couldn't be explained away by exhaustion or the lingering sadness of losing their mother. They sat with their lunchboxes open, but instead of eating, they were carefully dividing their sandwiches into smaller portions, wrapping them in napkins, and tucking them away into their backpacks. At first, it seemed innocent, like something children would do when they didn't finish their meals. But then Melanie saw their eyes. They weren't playful or carefree. There was fear behind those wide eyes, a quiet desperation that struck her to her core. "Are you sure you're not hungry?" Melanie asked gently, crouching beside their table. She didn't want to accuse them of anything, but she needed answers. Liam's eyes widened in alarm, and for a brief moment, his small hand froze mid-air, clutching a sandwich that he hadn't yet hidden. Noah's reaction was even more telling. His gaze darted nervously to Liam before he quickly nodded in agreement, trying to cover up the truth. "I ate breakfast late, Miss Porter," Liam mumbled, his voice strained, almost rehearsed. Noah quickly added, "Yeah, me too. Daddy made pancakes." Melanie didn't buy it. It was clear they were lying, but she held her ground, not wanting to push them too hard. She could see that their carefully constructed walls were beginning to crack, and she needed to tread lightly. "Why are you saving part of your lunch then?" she asked, keeping her voice as casual as possible. She didn't want them to feel threatened, but she couldn't ignore the mounting concern that was already setting off alarm bells in her head. The twins exchanged a glance, one of those silent, secret communications that only identical siblings can have. Then, without missing a beat, Noah blurted it out. "It's for our secret friend," he said, immediately clasping his hand over his mouth as if regretting his words. Liam shot him a panicked look, but it was too late. The confession hung in the air like an invisible weight. "Secret friend," Melanie repeated, her tone light but her heart now racing. This wasn't a game anymore. She had to know more. Noah nodded, his voice lowering as though afraid someone might overhear. "Yeah, he's really hungry sometimes," he added, his eyes wide with sincerity. Liam, trying to regain control of the situation, quickly backpedaled. "It's just pretend, Miss Porter. We're just playing a game." But the fear in his voice betrayed the lie. The moment the words left his lips, Melanie knew something wasn't right. She squeezed Liam's shoulder reassuringly and said, "Well, if you ever want to tell me about your secret friend, I'm always here to listen." She had no choice but to leave it there for now, but she couldn't shake the nagging sense that this was more than just children's fantasy. There was something darker lurking behind their secret. That evening after school, Melanie sat in her car in the parking lot, staring at the rows of trees that lined the street outside the school. Her thoughts were with Liam and Noah, and the mysterious secret they had been hiding. She couldn't let it go. She needed to know what was really happening in their lives. Her instincts told her to follow them. She had never done anything like this before, never followed a student home, but something told her she had to. She had to know if they were in danger. So, when the twins emerged from school, hand in hand with their father, Richard Bennett, Melanie did the unthinkable. She followed them. The Bennett family home wasn't far from the school, just a short drive through the quiet suburban streets of Oakwood Hills. Melanie kept a discreet distance, not wanting to alert the family to her presence, but every mile she drove felt like a heavy burden pressing down on her chest. When the Bennett SUV pulled into a gas station, Melanie hesitated. Should she keep going? Should she just turn around? But something in her gut told her that she was on the right path. She couldn't stop now. She watched as Richard Bennett went inside the convenience store, leaving the boys alone in the car. Through the back window, Melanie could see the twins talking animatedly, their hands gesturing excitedly. Their voices were too muffled for Melanie to hear clearly, but she could tell that they weren't talking about anything ordinary. Then, after a few minutes, the SUV continued down the road, pulling into a sprawling old Victorian house. It was tucked behind a rusted iron fence, the yard overgrown with weeds, the bushes on the front steps untrimmed and wild. The house looked abandoned in a way, though Melanie knew it was just neglected. She parked across the street, trying not to make it obvious that she was watching, but she couldn't look away. As the boys were ushered inside by their father, Richard looked at his watch and quickly turned around, heading back to his car. He was leaving. Melanie stayed where she was. She didn't know what she expected, but she couldn't just drive away without knowing more. Then something happened. She saw the twins again. They came out of the house alone, holding hands as they made their way to a set of steps leading down to a cellar door behind the house. Melanie's heart skipped a beat. Why were they going down there? What were they hiding? It was then that she heard the faint cry. A faint, desperate cry coming from the basement. She couldn't ignore it. She had to act. Melanie's mind raced as she made her way quietly across the yard, staying hidden in the shadows. She crouched near the side of the house, peering through a window that was mostly covered by ivy. What she saw inside made her blood run cold. The basement was dark, lit only by a dim bulb hanging from the ceiling. It was a bleak, unfinished space, with concrete floors and exposed beams. But in one corner, something caught her attention. Mattress. Blanket. A small pile of children's books. Sitting cross-legged on the mattress was a child, older than the twins but still young, maybe 7 or 8. His face was gaunt, his clothes too big for his thin frame, and his matted brown hair hung over his eyes. He clutched a teddy bear to his chest, his expression blank, almost lifeless. The twins were sitting in front of him, their backpacks open, presenting the food they'd brought to the boy. The granola bars, the fruit cups, the sandwiches, everything they had hidden away during lunch. Noah's voice drifted through the window. "We got extra today. Miss Porter gave it to us." The boy accepted the food with trembling hands, his eyes darting nervously to the ceiling. "Did your dad see you?" he whispered, his voice hoarse and scared. Liam shook his head. "He won't be back until after dinner." Melanie's mind was spinning. The twins weren't playing a game. They were feeding a child who wasn't their friend. He was a prisoner, a child who had been taken, hidden, and forced to live in the shadows of a basement. And Melanie had just stumbled onto the horrifying truth. She didn't waste another second. She reached for her phone with trembling hands and dialed 911. She couldn't let this go. Not now. The minutes that followed felt like hours. Melanie's heart pounded in her chest as she sat frozen behind the oak tree, waiting for the police to arrive. She had already given them the details. She had already described the kidnapped boy, Christopher Reynolds, the 7-year-old who had been taken from his parents 6 months ago. When the patrol cars arrived, they moved swiftly. Officers secured the perimeter of the house, and Melanie finally emerged from her hiding place, her legs shaky with adrenaline. She explained everything to the officers, her voice steady despite the shock still churning in her stomach. They wasted no time in breaching the cellar door, and minutes later they emerged, leading the twins, their faces pale with fear, and Christopher, blinking in the daylight for the first time in months. The days that followed were a blur. Melanie sat in the back of a patrol car, wrapped in a shock blanket, as paramedics examined the rescued boy. Her mind was still reeling, trying to process everything she had seen and heard. Liam and Noah were too young to understand what had just happened. They thought they were helping. They thought they were playing a game. But now their world had been shattered. Their father, the man they had trusted above all others, had been hiding a terrible secret. Richard Bennett was arrested, his face twisted with rage as officers led him away. Melanie stood there, watching the twins, trying to make sense of it all. How would they ever reconcile their father's betrayal? How would they rebuild their sense of right and wrong? Christopher, for his part, was safe. His parents had been notified, and soon he would be reunited with them. But for Liam and Noah, the road ahead would be long, filled with confusion, fear, and a need to rebuild their lives from the ground up. The next few weeks brought small but significant steps in their healing process. Melanie kept in touch with the family, offering support when she could. The twins were placed in foster care with their aunt, Catherine, while Christopher's parents made plans for a fresh start in another state. Though they had been manipulated by their father into believing they were protecting Christopher, the twins were beginning to understand the full extent of what had happened. Slowly they began to heal, thanks to therapy and the loving support of Catherine, their aunt, and their extended family. The road was long, but Melanie knew one thing for sure. These two little boys had shown her something extraordinary. Despite everything they had been through, they still had the capacity for kindness, for care, and for compassion. They had shared their food, their love, and their lives with someone who needed them the most. And in the end, that was the real story. In the face of unimaginable darkness, the human spirit still shone brightly. As the days went on, Melanie continued to reflect on the events that had unfolded, especially as the twins began their new lives with their aunt, Catherine. The weight of what Liam and Noah had endured, the things they had seen, and the confusion they must have felt was something that lingered in her mind. But there was something else that stayed with her. The incredible resilience of these two little boys. Despite the horrors they had faced, they still showed kindness. They still cared for Christopher when he was at his most vulnerable, offering him food and comfort in a way that most adults would have struggled to do. Melanie knew that this story, this tragic yet hopeful tale, wasn't just about a crime. It was about the ability of humans, especially children, to retain compassion and love in the face of unimaginable darkness. Liam and Noah had been manipulated, but in their hearts, they were still the little boys who cared about a friend, even one in the most desperate of circumstances. That, in itself, was a powerful reminder that kindness could persist in the most unlikely places. As for Christopher, he was now reunited with his parents, beginning his journey of recovery, surrounded by the love of those who had been searching for him all along. The community rallied around him, offering support and warmth as he adapted to the life he should have had all along. The healing, however, would take time. There would be setbacks, questions, and emotional scars that could never be erased. But the love and compassion that surrounded Christopher, Liam, and Noah were the first steps toward healing. The resilience of children, their ability to bounce back from trauma, and their remarkable capacity for kindness have never been more evident. Melanie's journey, from a concerned teacher to an unwitting hero, had opened her eyes to the extraordinary things that can happen when we follow our instincts and act with love and compassion. But this story doesn't end here. It's a reminder that, no matter how dark the world might seem, there's always room for kindness. It might come in unexpected forms, like two little boys sneaking food to a friend, or it might come in the form of an adult, like Melanie, who listens to her gut and does what's right, even when it's hard. And that's why we want to share this story with you, to remind you that even in the hardest times, the smallest gestures can make the biggest difference. If this story moved you or made you think about the kindness we can all offer, we'd love for you to share it with others. Like, share, and comment below with your thoughts. Let us know how acts of kindness have impacted your life, or if you know someone who made a difference in a difficult situation. And don't forget to subscribe to Acts of Kindness Stories. Our goal is to reach 10,000 subscribers, and with your support, we can spread more stories of hope, courage, and compassion to the world. Thank you for joining us, and remember, no act of kindness is too small. Together we can make the world a little brighter.